Hello and welcome to the Kevin Mannix Report. I'm your host, Kevin Mannix. Our program is designed to give all of us a little more insight and information about what goes on in government throughout the state of Oregon and some of the key personalities and officials who are involved in government service. Our guest today is a lady who has been heavily involved in government for several years, but has used her legal expertise to help our court system, and she is presently in the position of State Court Administrator. I'm talking about Kingsley Click. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin.
One of the things we try to do at the beginning of each of these programs is get a little bit more feeling for an individual as a person. We see all these government officials out there and who is this person? Where is this person from? That sort of thing. Can you give us some idea about where you grew up and how you ended up here in Oregon? A little background information.
Yes, I'll try to give you the short version. I grew up in a military family, so we lived all over the country and overseas in my childhood, and then I went to high school in Florida, and I went to college and law school in Kansas, and then I moved to Washington, D.C. and worked with the federal court system. And then in 1984, moved to Oregon, to Salem, and started work with the Office of the State Court Administrator, which we'll probably talk about what it does in a little bit.
Now, when you mentioned working in Washington with the federal court system, what kind of work were you doing there at the time?
It was the administrative office of the U.S. courts, so it's very similar to our administrative office for the Oregon court system. So I was in the equivalent of an inspector general unit, and our mission, as it were, was to visit the federal courts at the circuit court level and, actually the district court level and the Court of Appeals around the country and do program evaluations, court governance evaluations, and then fiscal compliance. So we had attorneys and management analysts and auditors that would travel as a team and review the courts and provide a report on kind of the health of that particular court and provide that to the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, as well as the organizations that worked with them.
Before you got into that, when you were in law school, was this something that you wanted to do, or did this just evolve over time?
I would say it evolved. It's kind of one of those things that you fell into, but it was in an area that you had always had a lot of interest. I mean, in truth, in law school, I don't think you give second thought to how do the courts run day to day or who does what. I think, like most folks, that's kind of a secondary issue, and it just never really comes up about who's behind the counter and what happens after that, and because you're more concerned about the law or the specific case or actually, the elements of justice. So I didn't even give it a second thought. I actually moved to Washington, D.C. to pursue environmental law. I was very interested in political science and certainly public policy areas. And at that time, I was feeling very strongly that if the air you breathed and the water you drank were contaminated, that kind of brought civilization to a halt, and that was probably a good place to start. But
so you were there looking at environmental law as an area of practice and concern, but then you ended up working on the court administration side for the feds. Is that where you met Paul Conley?
no, I actually, well, yes, I met him in Washington, D.C. He was working with the American Bar Association, and then he worked with the administrative office for a while in the Federal Judicial Center.
And I mentioned Paul because he's your husband. I happen to be acquainted with him. And you two have a family now.
We do.
So you see, when people think of you as Kingsley Click, State Court Administrator, Government Official, they need to remember, too, we also have Supermom here, someone who's got kids and just like everybody else has to deal with all the pressures of home life and married life and all of that.
Mm-hmm. It's probably a lot of a good thing, and we kind of take it one day at a time, and I think a lot of families do that, and I'm very fortunate we don't have any family in the immediate area, but we do in the Northwest, but rely very much on other families. We all kind of help where we can with each other and getting children to where they need to go.
Well, this keeps you grounded in reality. You see, it's important for our citizen viewers to know that government officials are not just automatons who are doing this job and then they disappear, but you've got all those other things to deal with that everybody else out there has to deal with in terms of a home life. How do you, now, when you transition over to Oregon, what happened when you came to Oregon in terms of your involvement in the courts and that sort of thing?
Well, I was in the administrative office of the U.S. courts and had been very interested in after 7 years there. And D.C. is a wonderful place to, I would say, experience and work in, and there are many cultural and civic and interesting things there. But when you're at the point of raising your family, and unless you have some strong ties there, either professionally or family-wise, you kind of want a community that you can relate to and participate in, and your children can grow up in. And in the military life, even though you're moving around a lot, there is that microcosm. It is very much like a small town, and so I was looking to kind of get back to that sort of sense of community.
And you found it in Oregon?
I found it in Oregon.
Well, what did you first do when you came to Oregon in terms of your work?
I actually was hired by the state court administrator, Bill Linden, at the time. He had recently taken over in that position and had received some positions from the legislature to help bring the state court system into a state court system, because it had been county funded until a couple of years before that.
We should pause in and mention that one of the transitions that occurred was the circuit courts and district courts were basically county funded, and we created more of an integrated state funded system where the state was providing the funds at least for the judges and their operations. And so this is the transition you're talking about?
Right. In January of 1983, the 1981 legislature passed special legislation to create a unified state court system to realize efficiencies and better, more consistency statewide, I think, of funding and services. So Bill Linden came on in late. There was one state court administrator briefly before him to kind of meld that system, and then when he came on, he was looking for people to help bring, I think, the overall perspective of where we could get to, and having had the privilege of being able to see a wide variety of the federal courts in all sorts of different circumstances, I was able to bring kind of those insights and that type of experience to the Oregon state court system to say, okay, we can do it this way, and we can build towards this future.
So you were involved in that development, the integration of the state court system within Oregon under Bill Linden's leadership. Then later on, there's a transition where you became state court administrator. When did that happen?
That happened, I kind of count time by sessions. I think you probably do that too. He left in January of '95, being that session, and I had been his deputy state court administrator for about 3 years previous. Before that, I had worn several different hats in that office, and so I'd had a chance to kind of learn at his helm many of the duties and responsibilities, and I'm very indebted to him for that opportunity.
So in '95, you became the state court administrator?
And I actually was acting at that time and acted through the session, and that summer the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice decided to offer me the permanent position, and I don't know, I thought if there was something on the other side of session, I would like to see what it was, and we've just been busy ever since. So.
Well, in this position now, you've been there since 1995 as
Correct.
the top dog administrator, I'll call it that. We're into almost, well, 3.5 years of that, close to 4, and you're heading into the 1999 legislative session. As we're at this point in time with the judicial system, maybe we ought to pause and mention to our audience what the structure is like now. We've got the Supreme Court of the state with 7 justices, and they elect a Chief Justice. But the Supreme Court is also at the top of the state court structure. We have the Court of Appeals, and then we do have the tax court, but and those cases can be appealed up to the Supreme Court in that structure. Then we have the circuit courts, which used to be district and circuit courts, but they've been merged, and from a county perspective, you almost think of them as at the county level, but they are state courts by districts circuit and district courts are now in judicial districts throughout the state. And your job as state court administrator, I take it then, is to try to have all these components working smoothly together. Can you talk a little bit about how that interaction works with the various circuit courts and the Chief Justice and how you work out all these things?
We kind of have three different hats in our office. One is to assist the Chief Justice in the statewide leadership and kind of priorities and policies for the statewide system. And then the other part is kind of a support role for the trial courts and the appellate courts. The Chief Justice appoints a presiding judge in each of the judicial districts. There are 26 now. There are circuit courts in all the counties, but we're organized in 26 judicial districts.
Some districts have multiple counties in them.
Yes. Correct. And they serve for 2-year terms, subject to renewal. They are all elected officials, the judges in the counties. There are 130, actually there's 163. Starting January, we have 3 more positions that come on board, and I'm always trying to keep track of what number we're on. We're 163 judges at the circuit court level. The presiding judges hire a trial court administrator to help in the daily activities of the trial court.
So for the 27 judicial districts, we have 27 trial court administrators.
Correct, 26.
26, excuse me.
Yeah.
And then do they work with you, or go ahead and explain
Yes, it's
that.
kind of a coordinated approach. They work directly for the presiding judge, and the presiding judge is appointed by the Chief Justice, but we provide the centralized information, support systems, the personnel functions, the budget and finance, major education, the legal counsel, because like any state agency equivalent, we have claims and contracts and things that need to be taken care of. We have internal auditing. We also run 2 major programs. One is the Citizen Review Board, the Citizen Foster Care Review program, and the Indigent Defense program, which you're aware, which provides legal counsel to those who are eligible for it, and it's mandated in certain proceedings. So we have a number of different hats, but with the trial courts, it is a kind of a complementary approach. We have the statewide policies and procedures. They have a lot of autonomy to work on their local programs and organize their resources, but we try to work on common goals. The court has a vision statement for the year 2020, the preferred look at what does our justice system look like in the state of Oregon in the year 2020. And I think the Chief Justice may have spent some time when he was on your program talking about that, but that's helped very much to give us some common goals where we think the court system should be headed in appropriate dispute resolution and in family law and access to justice, kind of bringing more into reality those concepts that we all learned probably in elementary school and junior high about what is this part of democracy, what is the judicial branch, what is justice in reality, and how do you best provide that to the people of the country.
Well, the hardest part of dealing with this, it would seem, is making sure that all these structures fit together in some symmetrical or copacetic way so that we can get the job done. And before we talk any more about that, though, I will mention to our audience that you're with us on the Kevin Mannix Report. Our guest today is Kingsley Click. She is the State Court Administrator. If you ever have any questions or concerns at any time, feel free to write to me at the Kevin Mannix Report, 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon, 97301. And if you have something pressing and you'd like to call, you can call 503-364-1913. We're always happy to hear from you and welcome your comments and suggestions. And now we'll return to our guest today, Kingsley Click, our State Court Administrator. We were talking a little bit about the complexities or the interconnections of these various levels, and if I were trying to think of this in simple terms, if I was looking at it from a county perspective, a given county has a circuit court. It may be joined with other counties in one judicial district, so they share that circuit court. That is the principal trial court now within the state system. That court then has one or more judges, and there is one chief judge of this county or judicial district circuit court. They are appointed, those chief judges are appointed by the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court. But we need to remind ourselves all of these judges were elected in the first instance, or at least they
Right.
came into office through what is supposed to be an elective process. There are a lot of
They have an
appointments to
opportunity to be
vacancies.
elected, yes.
They have an opportunity to be elected, is a good way of putting it.
Yes.
But again, the Supreme Court and the state court administrator working with the Chief Justice are there to sort of look at the whole system and really run this as a branch of government. We think of the legislative branch and the executive branch. Sometimes we forget there's also the judicial branch of government. And your job then, it seems to me, is to be sort of chief cook and bottle washer for all the nitty-gritty stuff, the computers, the personnel, the staff. Is that a fair perception, or am I stating it wrong?
No, it's a fair perception. I mean, you're supposed to be there to help balance out the inequities in the system and redirect resources and provide technical assistance and support, you know, for people that are trying to implement the programs, to handle the complaints as they go up the kind of the chain. I mean, the administrative office kind of is the center for kind of the ultimate issues that can't get resolved at other places. But the resource issue and the legislative program are probably very, very key, because the courts are there to administer the laws that are enacted, and there are many things that go on during the legislative session where there's a lot of interest in either how the courts play those issues out, and so we do a lot of information providing to the legislature, as well as fiscal impacts. What is the impact on, if you pass these laws, what is the fiscal impact on the court system?
We should mention that for a moment. A fiscal impact means, in essence, what resources are going to be needed to implement this law. And each bill that's developed and moved through the legislative process has a fiscal impact statement where agency input comes in, and in your case, the courts have to give input about, well, sure, you may want to do this XYZ law, but when you do it, be aware that we're going to have to use these additional resources to implement it. Or if it was reducing something in terms of impact, well, occasionally there is a positive fiscal impact in that we're not going to spend as much, but the vast majority of time we have to do these additional things if the law passes, and so you give the information from the judicial perspective as to what it's going to cost.
Correct, from the judicial perspective.
You also get to bring the whole financial package every 2 years to the legislature and present a budget. The Chief Justice comes in, but aren't you the key person in putting together the budget for the judicial department or judicial branch?
I am, and the budget people in our office. It's a very critical part, because it is, without a healthy budget, the court system is crippled. So we've been very fortunate to have support of the legislature since the state funding to maintain what I think is a current level of service where cases are tried. Most cases are tried or settled within a year of filing. So the technology support has been very critical too. But we're kind of on the crux now. We're coming into some major issues in our budget for the legislature to look at. I mean, the technology infrastructure has aged significantly since it started, and that's kind of a critical piece, to be able to share information with the other system providers in the criminal and juvenile justice system, as well as the public. It's one of the things that has tied us together, the state court system, being able to have a connected...
That sharing of information is
Right.
a key element. Well, you'll be dealing with issues about, I assume, additional judgeships to deal with the
very big
increased
issue.
judicial caseload?
That's correct. There is a joint bench and bar committee that evaluates in the interim requests for new judgeship positions. It was an attempt to take it out of the political arena for the evaluation part, and that's probably been about 6 years of that sort of approach. And, you know, with the judicial branch, the judges are the ones that are the judicial branch. I mean, they're the entities that are authorized and empowered with the judicial branch's prerogatives. And so without sufficient number of judges, everything kind of goes to halt. We're kind of the clearinghouse. I mean, if you have a crime and you want an incarceration, it's got to go through the courts. If you have a family matter and you want to change custody or have a divorce or deal with a dependency matter, I mean, you need the court's authority to go forward. So,
well, part of this process has included the development of alternative dispute resolution, meaning finding ways of resolving some cases short of an official trial in front of a judge. And it seems to me that the court system and U.S. State Court Administrator have also tried to encourage the development of those alternatives. Can you give us some idea of how that's working?
Sure, I think it's working well. What I see, it's expanding, and I think that's appropriate. I think there's more areas that we can use those sorts of approaches. I think there's been a lot of expansion, and we're working now on better coordination of it. I mean, in the ideal, a person can come in with whatever their issue, and they may or may not decide they need to file a case. They may be able to have a local community dispute resolution center that gives them the tools or other ways of dealing with their issues. If they come into court, there's still an option of having an arbitrator or perhaps trying to mediate their case instead of having to go to trial. The trial is, we hope, kind of the last resort of settlement. I mean, some things you do need to go to trial, and some things you do need a judge to enact, but many, many things people can resolve in less costly and probably more satisfactory ways.
Now, one of the things that you've been challenged with or saddled with is the indigent defense system, and I know the court system has come back for several sessions now saying to the legislature you would like a little more independence or distance from the obligation of providing the attorneys for indigent defendants, defendants who can't afford their own attorneys, and we provide attorneys to represent those defendants. And right now, the judicial branch itself ends up having to run that system. The proposal has generally been along the lines of establishing a commission to give oversight and to pull it away a little bit from a judicial branch oversight. And what is the reason for the concern about having some separate oversight connection?
It's several-fold. Probably the most compelling is what I call the conflict of interest issues. One of the reasons the indigent defense function is within the judicial branches because the courts are seen as not only there to preserve law and order and be part of that process, but to be there for the little person against, I would say, the government institutions or perhaps kind of the majority rule. You're there to protect the individual and their liberties and their rights. And I think when you look at three branches of government, that's kind of where the courts are, where it fits in. But right now, when it's under our office and right under the court system directly, as opposed to being separate within the judicial branch or executive branch, if that makes it more effective, there is a daily conflict for the judge, because the judge is supposed to be the neutral, impartial arbitrator of the dispute or the issue in front of it, and yet at the same time, that judge is also charged with making sure one party to that dispute is protected or has sufficient funding to present their best case. And so when you're in that situation, not only does the judge have to rule on their eligibility, but also the actual payments that are going out. And if you, for the judge, the best cases presented or make it easiest for the judge to have a concise and coherent argument or presentation of the facts, or if there's a jury involved also. So if you're in a position where you have to deny, not only does it kind of take you out of your neutral role, but you're also, denials can be appeals if you approve it. Not only do you have probably a better case that's presented in front of you, but you don't have an appeal, and it's one less headache.
Well, in fact, if we thought about it with the shoe on the other foot, imagine, if you will, a system where the judge had to approve the prosecution expenses,
correct,
or the appointment of prosecutors, or what investigation would be allowed. There'd be an outcry saying, oh, we shouldn't make judges do this, and we've sort of gotten used to, because indigent defense grew through a number of rulings over the years, we sort of got used to this idea of, well, the judges will take care of it, and the judges are saying, please, no, I really would rather not be taking care of this. And so perhaps we can get the next session of the Legislative Assembly to pay a little closer attention to this issue.
Yes, and I know you have some interest in that area, and I really appreciate that, because I think the concept of a defense commission can not only provide quality counsel, but I think it'll allow us to realize a lot of administrative efficiencies that we've tried to put into place, but we can only go so far within the current system because of the way it works and the conflicts that are there. So I think we could maintain the safeguards that you want in that kind of system, but really have a much better structural organization for it, and save tax dollars, or as we say, cost avoidance, because there's always more cases coming in the door.
But savings as to the current level of what you're doing is what you're talking about.
Correct.
Cost avoidance, that is, as other costs are going up, you keep a lid on how much of that has to be spent.
Right.
Well, shifting from that a little bit, and I do think that there will be attention paid seriously to that issue this session, because I think Senator Neil Bryant, who will chair Senate Judiciary, will be real open to that. I'm speaking out of turn because I haven't asked him. That's my perception. And I know that the House Judiciary types will be open to it. I can speak for myself, and I think that Representative Lane Shetterly has certainly shown an openness on that topic. So maybe we can make some progress during the session. There's another issue area that I'm curious about, and that has to do with the county operation of the buildings themselves. Is that an issue that's going to come to the Legislative Assembly this coming session?
I know it will be there. It's been kind of a growing issue at the time of state funding, as I understand it, and there was an agreement that the state would take over the funding of the judges and the staff and Indigent Defense mandated payments, which is our jurors, and take over those in exchange for the counties continuing to provide suitable and adequate facilities for the courts that are in their various individual counties. That was an area with some of the revenue shifts that have happened in recent times that have become a growing concern both for the courts and for the counties.
And I can probably state it more bluntly than you can, because you're in the judicial
We're squatters,
branch.
as the chief says. We don't.
The state is using county-provided facilities,
Right.
and the counties are pressed for funds because of the property tax limitations, and are more than hinting to the state, isn't it time the state took over the funding for the actual structures of the courts? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, they have a bill draft, and we have a court county facilities work group, and they have a bill draft that would look for the state to take on the responsibilities, certainly of new facilities, and to also provide some general fund support for the maintenance of the current facilities.
Well, that can be a very positive, dynamic discussion, as long as we understand it is the state really fulfilling all of its obligations. And for those who are looking to local control, well, the local control was lost when the judges were no longer, and their staff were no longer funded locally, and that's been a long time now. With that comment by me, I need to mention that our time is up. So I want to thank you for joining us on the program. And I'll mention to our audience that we appreciated you joining us with Kingsley Click, our state court administrator. I hope that this provided you with some additional information and insight about what's going on. And again, thank you much for joining us. We'll see you next time.